A single dad stumbles upon a forgotten diary in a thrift store, never expecting it to belong to the woman who will unravel his past and rewrite his future. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The bell above the door jingled as Michael stepped into the thrift store, a gust of cold air following him like an unwelcome guest. The place smelled of old denim, dusty books, and memories left behind. He tugged his worn jacket tighter and glanced down at Emily, who was bundled in a pink puffer coat 2 sizes too big and holding his hand with a grip far too strong for a 7-year-old. "Keep your eyes out for gloves," he said, brushing a stray flake of snow from her hair. Emily nodded, her eyes already scanning the shelves like it was some kind of treasure hunt. She always liked this place. It was like a storybook, filled with forgotten things waiting for someone to love them again. Michael wandered toward the back, where a sagging bookshelf leaned against the wall. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, maybe a winter novel, something dog-eared and hopeful. He liked stories where people got second chances. His fingers trailed along the spines, cookbooks, romance paperbacks, dusty biographies. Then he saw it. A leather-bound book tucked sideways between 2 clunky hardcovers. It didn't have a title on the spine, just a small gold-embossed star in the corner. Curious, he pulled it out. The leather was soft and worn, like it had been held often. He opened it to the first page and froze. Neat handwriting stretched across the paper in deep blue ink. Not printed, not typed, written. The words weren't addressed to anyone, but they carried weight. "I don't know who I am without him." And maybe that's the scariest part, having to learn. Michael read the line again. It hit too close, too sharp. "Dad?" Emily called from a few aisles away, holding up a pair of mismatched gloves. "These work?" "Perfect," he replied, though he barely looked. His eyes drifted back to the page, then the next, then the one after that. The entries were raw, poetic, honest in a way people rarely were out loud. He looked toward the register, then back at the journal in his hands. It felt wrong to leave it, like whoever wrote it wasn't quite done speaking. He tucked it under his arm, gathered Emily, and walked toward the counter, unaware that this forgotten diary, lost among discarded things, was about to rewrite the story of his life. Back home, the wind howled against the windows, rattling the old panes in their frames. The heater clicked and groaned, doing its best to keep the small house warm. Michael hung up Emily's coat and watched her dart off to the living room, already pulling out her crayons like it was just another ordinary afternoon. In some ways, it was. But in the quiet hum beneath it all, something felt different. He sat at the kitchen table, the soft leather of the diary cool beneath his fingers. For a while he didn't open it, just traced the gold star on the corner with his thumb, like it might open up a portal if he pressed hard enough. Finally, he flipped to the first page. The handwriting was graceful, feminine, written in dark ink that bled ever so slightly into the thick, creamy paper. The kind of cursive that people didn't seem to write in anymore. It wasn't messy or rushed. It was careful, like every word had weight. At the bottom of the first entry, a small signature, AJ. He turned the page, and then another. "I wish grief had a deadline, that I could mark a date on a calendar and say, 'This is when the ache will stop.' But it doesn't. It lingers in the corners, like dust no one can quite reach." Michael leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. Maybe grocery lists, idle thoughts, something mundane. But this was something else. These words weren't written for attention. They were written because someone had nowhere else to put them. AJ didn't write like she wanted to be found. She wrote like she needed to survive. He flipped through more pages, each one a window into a life he couldn't quite see clearly, only sense. A breakup, a move, a job walked away from. A sense of being unmoored. One entry mentioned a city skyline I used to love, followed by a line scratched out so violently the page had nearly torn. "Dad?" Emily's voice floated in from the living room. "Can you help me with the green crayon?" He closed the book gently. "Yes, sweetheart. Be right there." As he stood, he caught himself glancing at the diary once more. He didn't know who AJ was, but she was real, raw. And for reasons he didn't understand yet, her words were beginning to settle somewhere deep inside him. The house was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood contracting in the cold. Outside, snow fell in slow, silent flurries, cloaking the world in white. Michael sat at the kitchen table, the only light coming from the small lamp overhead, casting a warm halo over the open diary in front of him. Emily had been asleep for hours, curled beneath her favorite blanket, with a stuffed bear tucked under her chin. Michael had told himself he'd only read one more page. That had been over an hour ago. He flipped another. "Some days I wake up and I don't recognize the woman in the mirror. There's no spark in her eyes, no laughter ready to spill from her lips, just a tired stranger trying to remember who she used to be." The words pulled at something in him he didn't like to name. He'd never met AJ, didn't even know what she looked like, but he could see her, or at least feel her. And he knew the ache behind those lines. He'd lived it, waking up in a quiet house without anyone to laugh at his dumb jokes or remind him to eat dinner. Loneliness had a way of sneaking up on you, even when you thought you'd made peace with it. He rubbed his eyes, then leaned back in his chair, the leather diary still open in front of him. The entries weren't always sad. Some were thoughtful, some even hopeful. One page, written in slightly messier handwriting, read, "I think I smiled today. Not one of those polite ones, but a real smile, the kind that makes your cheeks hurt and your heart flutter. It scared me, but it also reminded me that I'm not gone, not completely." He closed the book gently, holding it for a moment like it might disappear if he wasn't careful. Then he glanced at the clock. Almost 2 a.m. The next morning came too soon, with Emily tugging on his sleeve and the sun bleeding pale light through the curtains. Michael blinked himself awake, his thoughts still tangled with the words he'd read the night before. He made coffee, watching the machine sputter to life, and caught himself wondering not just who AJ was, but where she was now. Was she okay? Did she still smile the way she'd written about? And why did he feel like her story wasn't finished? The morning passed in fragments, packing Emily's lunch, scraping ice off the windshield, answering her endless stream of 7-year-old questions. But even as Michael moved through the motions, his mind drifted. Not toward work, not toward bills, but back to the worn pages waiting on the kitchen table where he'd left the diary half open like it had been mid-conversation. After dropping Emily at school, he parked a few blocks away from the garage and just sat in the car, engine idling, breath fogging the windows. The ache in his chest wasn't new. He'd learned to live with it. He'd learned how to smile when he needed to, how to fill out forms that asked for spouse, if applicable, without blinking. He didn't cry anymore, not often anyway. But there was something about AJ's words that unwrapped all the pieces he'd packed away in boxes too heavy to open. He died in the spring. The world bloomed around me while I withered inside. People think grief is loud, wailing, breaking things. But for me, it was silence. No more coffee cups left out, no more texts asking if I needed anything, just me, breathing, and sometimes even that felt like too much. Michael read that passage again during his lunch break, sitting alone behind the garage with a sandwich he didn't have the appetite to finish. He had never found the right words for what it felt like when Lily died. Everyone around him said the same things. She'd want you to be strong. You've got Emily now. Time heals. But AJ, a stranger with looping handwriting, had somehow described it perfectly. He thought of the quiet evenings after Emily had gone to bed, the couch still shaped to fit Lily's body like it hadn't realized she was gone. The days he felt like a ghost in his own life. The nights he sat awake, staring at the ceiling, afraid of forgetting her voice. And now, there was this voice in a journal speaking through paper and ink, echoing everything he thought no one else could understand. He closed the diary slowly, not out of disinterest, but reverence. Whoever AJ was, she didn't just understand grief. She wore it the same way he did, quietly, daily, and somehow that made him feel less alone. The evening settled in soft and slow, snow whispering against the windows as the world outside turned to pale gray. Michael stood at the stove, stirring a pot of tomato soup, the kind from a can but doctored up with garlic and a pinch of oregano, the way Lily used to do. Emily sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs beneath her chair, carefully coloring a picture of a fox wearing a crown. "Do foxes really become kings?" she asked, looking up. Michael smiled faintly. "In stories, they can be anything." She hummed thoughtfully and went back to her crayons. For a while, the only sounds were the scrape of colored wax on paper and the gentle simmer of soup. But then, without looking up, Emily spoke again. "Do you think Mom would have liked my drawing?" The spoon stilled in Michael's hand. He turned the heat down and took a breath. It wasn't the first time she'd brought up Lily, but it was rare. More often, it was a photo glanced at or a quiet moment when they'd walk past the rosebush Lily planted, still blooming despite the cold. "Yeah," he said, voice soft. "She would have loved it." Emily looked up at him, her expression curious in the way only a child's could be, innocent but piercing. "What did she like to draw?" Michael leaned against the counter, drying his hands on a towel. "She used to sketch flowers. Not big ones, little wildflowers. She kept a notebook full of them. Do we still have it?" The question caught him. He hadn't thought about that notebook in a long time. Somewhere, maybe. Buried in the boxes he still hadn't touched in the attic. "Maybe," he said. "We could look." Emily nodded, satisfied for the moment, and went back to coloring. But Michael remained still, watching her. She didn't know how her question had cracked something open in him, how her voice had nudged at a door he kept locked tight. Later that night, after she was tucked into bed, he found himself sitting at the foot of the attic stairs, the diary on his lap. He hadn't cried in a while, but now, with Lily's memory floating fresh in his mind, and AJ's words echoing quietly through his heart, it felt like the grief had gently tapped him on the shoulder and whispered, "You're still carrying me." And he realized he hadn't just buried Lily. He'd buried parts of himself right alongside her. The next morning was colder than the last, the kind of cold that made your breath stick to your scarf and your fingers ache no matter how thick your gloves were. Michael dropped Emily off at school with a quick hug and a reminder to wear her hat, then drove straight to the thrift store without fully admitting to himself why. He told himself it was nothing, just a harmless visit. Maybe to browse for a few more winter things, maybe to look for more clues in the book section, maybe to ask. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, the warmth from the space heater by the front counter brushing against his cheeks. The place looked the same, crammed shelves, a rack of lopsided shoes, holiday decorations tossed into a clearance bin. But today he walked straight up to the counter. The cashier was a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a bun and reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. She looked up from her crossword puzzle and smiled. "Back so soon?" she asked. Michael nodded, suddenly unsure how to phrase what he needed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the diary, holding it gently like it might crumble in his hands. "This was here a few days ago. I was wondering, do you know who donated it?" She adjusted her glasses, peering at the cover, then frowned thoughtfully. That one. I remember it. Came in with a small box of books, most paperbacks, nothing special, but this one stood out, looked too nice to be tossed in with the rest." Michael leaned forward a little. "Do you remember who brought it in?" The woman hesitated. "Well, we don't usually track donations that closely unless they leave a name, but yeah, I do remember. Young woman, maybe late 20s, early 30s, brown hair, sharp coat, Kind of lost-looking, if I'm honest. She came in just before closing a few weeks ago. Told me she was cleaning out her car and didn't want to keep anything that didn't fit in her new life. Michael's heart picked up. Did she leave a name? Anything at all? She shook her head. No, but she paid cash for a coffee mug and wrote something on a napkin. I think I tossed it in the bag. A napkin? The cashier chuckled softly. It had a quote on it. Something about starting over. Michael's chest tightened. Starting over. It sounded like something AJ would write. And just like that, what began as simple curiosity became something else entirely. He didn't know what he was looking for exactly, but he knew he wasn't ready to stop. The next day, Michael returned to the thrift shop again, this time with a purpose that felt bigger than logic could explain. The cashier from yesterday wasn't there, but the shop's owner, a man in his 60s with a deep voice and a knit cap pulled low over his ears, stood behind the counter, scribbling something into a receipt ledger. Michael cleared his throat. "Morning." The man looked up. "Hey there, looking for anything in particular?" Michael hesitated, then pulled the diary from inside his coat. "Actually, I'm trying to find out who donated this." The man raised an eyebrow, then leaned forward to take a closer look. "That from the book bin?" "Yeah," Michael said. "The woman at the register yesterday remembered a customer who might have brought it in, said she looked like she was starting over." The man scratched his chin. "Oh, yeah, I remember her now." Michael straightened. "You do?" "Not many people say that out loud when they're dropping off junk," the man said with a wry smile. "But she did. Came in right around the end of the month. Had 2 boxes of stuff, books, some clothes, an old pair of hiking boots, said she was leaving behind anything that didn't fit who she wanted to be." Michael felt the words settle into him like pebbles in still water. "Did she say her name?" he asked, already guessing the answer. The man shook his head. Didn't ask, didn't offer. She looked like she'd been crying, to be honest, but the kind of crying that comes after something, after a goodbye or a big choice. He paused, then nodded toward the back room. "We keep the old donation slips and leftover stuff that doesn't make it out to the floor right away. You're welcome to look through it if you think something might help." Michael thanked him and headed toward the back, heart thudding against his ribs. The air grew colder as he stepped into the storage area, rows of cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly under buzzing fluorescent lights. Somewhere in that mess maybe there'd be a clue, a note, a name. And if not, he still wasn't turning back. He didn't know who AJ was, but her words had found a home inside him, and maybe, just maybe, he could find his way to hers. The afternoon light filtered through the kitchen window in quiet gold, casting long shadows across the worn tile floor. Michael sat at the table with the diary open again, flipping slowly through its pages, careful not to miss anything. He'd read most of it by now, twice, maybe 3 times, but something compelled him to comb it again, as if a thread had been dropped, and he just needed to pick it up. That's when he saw it, tucked between 2 pages, so faint it had almost vanished into the binding, was a folded napkin. His breath caught as he pulled it free. The paper was soft with age, the logo faded but still visible. A small leaf inked in green above the words, Bean and Birch Cafe. A local spot, one he hadn't been to in years. In one corner, written in the same looping handwriting as the diary, was a message. "If I can sit here and feel something again, even for a minute, then maybe I'm not broken beyond repair." Michael stared at the napkin for a long moment, fingers tightening around the edges. There was no date, no name. But it was her. AJ had written this. And suddenly, that little cafe, just a few blocks from Emily's school, didn't seem so ordinary anymore. The next day, after the last bell rang, and Emily came bouncing down the steps with her backpack half-zipped and hair slightly askew, Michael knelt beside her. "Want to stop for a treat?" he asked. Her eyes lit up. "Hot chocolate?" He smiled. "Exactly." The bell above the cafe door chimed as they stepped inside. The air smelled like cinnamon and espresso, warm and comforting. Michael scanned the room instinctively, half expecting, What? Her to still be here, sitting in the corner, writing in another diary? Emily tugged at his hand, pointing to a table near the window. That one. It looks cozy. They sat, and Michael ordered 2 hot chocolates, one with extra whipped cream, per Emily's request. As she stirred hers carefully, Michael glanced around the cafe. A wall of photos caught his eye, snapshots of regulars, moments frozen in laughter and steam. He didn't see her face, but he did see the napkins, same kind, stacked by the register. Something about that felt important, even if he didn't know why yet. Emily sipped her drink and leaned against him. "Is this a special place, Daddy?" He looked out the window, at the pale light softening the snow. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I think it might be." The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm. School drop-offs, long hours at the garage, dinners scraped together from whatever was left in the pantry, but the cafe lingered in Michael's mind like a song he couldn't shake. Something about it, about that napkin, those words, had made it feel like a thread leading somewhere he was meant to follow. So on Saturday morning, with Emily wrapped in her fox hoodie and a sketch pad under her arm, they went back. The Bean and Birch was less crowded than usual. A few couples whispered over mugs, a student clacked away on a laptop in the corner. And near the back, at a small table by the window, sat a woman with dark chestnut hair pulled into a loose braid. She wore a simple gray sweater, her coat draped over the chair beside her. A notebook sat open in front of her, pen moving steadily, deliberately. Michael froze. He didn't know her. And yet something inside him stirred, like recognizing the scent of a place you haven't been in years. He tried not to stare. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe it was coincidence. He ordered 2 hot chocolates, then led Emily toward a table nearby, his heart ticking in his chest like a faulty engine. As they sat, Emily leaned over and whispered, "That lady looks nice." Michael smiled. "Yeah, I guess she does." Emily turned in her seat, unabashed. "Hi," she chirped toward the woman. The woman looked up, startled for a second, but then smiled. It was a soft, unguarded kind of smile. "Hi there," she replied. "I like your braid," Emily said. "My mom used to do mine like that." Michael stiffened slightly, but the woman didn't flinch. Her expression shifted, just a flicker of something unreadable, but she nodded. "It's a beautiful style. I used to wear it that way when I was little, too." Emily beamed. "Are you drawing?" "Writing," the woman said. "Kind of like drawing with words." Michael finally spoke. "She's always been curious," he said, offering a sheepish smile. The woman looked at him then, really looked, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe, or something close. "I'm Anna," she said. Michael's throat caught for a second. "Anna? AJ?" "I'm Michael," he replied. "And this is Emily." "Nice to meet you both," Anna said softly. And though no one said anything more, Michael felt it, like the first page of something beginning, right there between coffee cups and cautious smiles. They stayed for nearly an hour, sipping hot chocolate and watching the world move slowly outside the cafe's frost-kissed windows. Anna remained at her table by the window, occasionally jotting something down in her notebook, occasionally pausing to stare at the swirling snow like it was telling her a story she hadn't heard before. Michael couldn't stop glancing in her direction. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, though she was, in that understated natural way that didn't ask for attention, but quietly commanded it. It was something deeper, a stillness about her, a weight beneath her calm that felt familiar, like someone who'd been through a storm and was still learning how to dry off. Emily had taken a liking to her instantly. She bounced between her sketchpad and soft questions, asking what Anna was writing, if she liked foxes, if she had kids. Anna answered everything with gentle patience, her voice low and kind. She never dismissed Emily's chatter. She just listened, smiled, and responded like each question deserved real thought. Michael appreciated that more than she probably realized. At one point, while Emily was distracted drawing a very abstract snowman, Anna glanced over. "She's a bright one," she said. "Yeah," Michael replied, smiling. Keeps me on my toes. You're doing a good job." The words were simple, but they landed heavily. People didn't say that often, not in a real way. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. Some days it doesn't feel like it. Anna tilted her head, a half smile playing at her lips. Those are usually the days you're doing better than you think. He looked at her then, and for a moment the world went quiet. Her eyes were soft, but sharp too, like she saw more than she let on, like maybe she was searching for something just like he was. He thought of the diary tucked away in the drawer at home, of the handwriting, of the initials. He thought of asking, but he didn't. Instead, he just nodded and returned her quiet smile with one of his own. "Let it unfold," he told himself. "Some stories are better when they don't rush the ending." The following week passed in a blur of routine. Early mornings, school lunches, oil changes, and invoices, but Michael found his thoughts returning to the coffee shop more often than he cared to admit. Every time he opened the kitchen drawer where the diary now rested, he felt a pull, not just to read it, but to understand the woman behind the words. Anna. They hadn't exchanged numbers, hadn't made plans. But something about that brief conversation lingered, the quiet, unforced ease between them, the way she spoke to Emily, not down to her, but with her. On Friday evening, as Michael helped Emily finish her homework at the kitchen table, she glanced up at him with a look she always wore when she had a plan. "Do you think Anna likes brownies?" He raised an eyebrow. "Probably. Why?" "Because we're making them for the school bake sale tomorrow," she said, grinning, "and I want her to come." Michael laughed softly. "Sweetheart, I don't even know if she'll be at the cafe again." "Then you should ask her," Emily said brightly. "You said she's nice." She smiled at me. "I think she'd come." Michael hesitated. It was a small town. People passed through, but something about Anna didn't feel temporary. The next morning, with a box of slightly uneven brownies in hand and Emily bouncing at his side, they returned to the Bean and Birch. Anna was there, same corner table, same quiet presence, pen dancing across the page. Emily didn't hesitate. She marched straight over and plopped the brownie box on the edge of Anna's table. "Hi, we made these. I'm having a bake sale tomorrow at school. You should come." Anna looked up, surprised at first, but her expression quickly softened. "A bake sale?" "For the playground fundraiser. There's cookies and cupcakes and music and me," Emily added proudly. Anna glanced at Michael, who stood a few steps behind, sheepish and uncertain. "It's tomorrow at noon," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "No pressure, just if you're free." Anna smiled, something warm and unreadable in her eyes. "I'd like that," she said. "I'll come." And just like that, the next chapter of their story began, with a brownie, a bold little girl, and an unexpected yes. The night before the bake sale, after Emily had fallen asleep with a smear of chocolate still on her cheek and her drawings of cupcakes scattered across the coffee table, Michael sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet, too quiet, as it often was when the day finally gave him space to think. The diary sat on the cushion beside him, its leather cover warm from resting under his hand. He hadn't touched it in a few days, afraid maybe he was reading too much into things, afraid of what it meant if he wasn't. But tonight, he needed to read her voice again. He opened to the next page, the one he hadn't dared touch since meeting Anna. And as his eyes scanned the delicate inked lines, something inside him stilled. "There's a little girl who smiled at me today like I was someone worth smiling at. She said I had a pretty braid, and I wanted to cry, not because of the compliment, but because I realized it's been so long since I let myself be seen." Michael's heart kicked in his chest. And her father, he looked at me like he was trying to figure something out, not in a bad way, not judgment, just quiet interest, like he knew what grief smelled like, and maybe that's why I didn't pull away. He read the passage again, slower this time, the words hitting deeper with every line. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't projection. This was her. Anna. He could see it now, not just in her words, but in the way she sat at that cafe table, how she smiled at Emily like it healed something in her. Anna was AJ, and she didn't know he knew. Michael closed the book gently and set it down, fingers lingering on the cover. He should tell her, but not yet. Not when things were still fragile and new, like a seed just beginning to sprout in frozen soil. For now, he'd keep the truth safe. Let her share it in her own time. And tomorrow, when she walked into that school gym with trays of cookies and off-key music playing in the background, he'd be there, not with answers, but with open eyes and a growing certainty that their stories had already begun to intertwine. The bake sale was a swirl of sugar and noise, folding tables crowded with cookies and cupcakes, construction paper signs taped crookedly to the walls, and the low hum of parents making polite conversation while kids ran wild between the tables. It was chaotic, in the way only an elementary school event could be, but to Michael it felt like something rare, normal. He stood behind the brownie table with Emily, helping her arrange the treats while she proudly explained to every passerby that she made them almost completely by herself. And then, just past noon, she arrived. Anna. She slipped in quietly, her coat buttoned tight against the wind, and a scarf knotted neatly at her throat. Her hair was pulled back again, and a soft smile played on her lips as she scanned the room. When she spotted them, her face lit up, not dramatically, just enough to say, "I'm glad I came." Michael raised a hand in greeting, suddenly aware of the smudge of frosting on his sleeve. "Hey, Bo," he said as she approached. "You made it." "I said I would," she replied, eyes flicking briefly to Emily. "Wouldn't miss it." They stood close enough to talk, but not too close. Something about her presence felt carefully measured, not cold, just cautious. Michael recognized that feeling all too well. He had lived it for years. They made small talk about the turnout, the loud music, the overly enthusiastic PTA moms. But even as they laughed quietly together, Michael's mind wandered. Every word she spoke, every flicker of emotion across her face, echoed something he'd already read, something he'd memorized from ink on paper. He could almost hear her diary entries between the pauses in their conversation. It was uncanny, the way her guarded smile matched the one she wrote about hiding, the way she looked at the chaos of the bake sale like it was too much and yet just what she needed. She was AJ, he was sure of it now, but he didn't say a word, because the woman standing in front of him wasn't just a voice in a diary. She was flesh and breath and cautious warmth, learning how to step back into the world. And Michael knew better than to rush that. Instead, he listened, watched, let her lead. And all the while, the truth sat quietly between them, unspoken, but beating steadily beneath the surface, like a heart just starting to remember how to love. The bake sale ended with crumpled napkins, half-empty trays, and Emily passed out in the back seat of Michael's car, her cheeks smudged with chocolate and glitter. He carried her inside gently, tucking her beneath her favorite blanket, and stood for a moment in the doorway, watching her chest rise and fall, peaceful, untouched by the questions weighing on his mind. Later that evening he found himself at the Bean and Birch again, this time not by chance, not with Emily, and not entirely for coffee. Anna was already there, in her usual spot by the window, the light overhead casting a soft halo around her. Her notebook was closed this time, her fingers cupped around a mug. When she saw Michael approach, she smiled, not out of politeness, but something warmer, familiar. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said as he sat down across from her. He shrugged gently. "I wasn't either." They sat in a comfortable quiet for a moment, the low chatter of the cafe fading into the background. Outside, snowflakes danced lazily past the glass, and Michael noticed how the light caught in her hair, the way her shoulders seemed just a little less tight than the first time they met. "I used to come here every morning," she said suddenly, her voice quieter than usual. "Back when I lived in the city." Michael raised his eyebrows. "City girl, huh?" Was, she said. Not anymore. She paused, wrapping both hands around her mug. I left my job a few months ago. Big title, bigger hours. I thought it made me important. It didn't. Just made me tired. A small laugh escaped her. Hollow but honest. And I left someone too. Someone who made me feel small, no matter how big my career got. Michael watched her carefully. She wasn't just telling him facts. She was offering pieces of herself. I'm sorry, he said softly. I'm not, she replied, lifting her gaze. I should have left years ago, but it's strange, you know, starting over when you don't even know what you're starting toward. He nodded. Yeah, I do. Anna looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, slow and real. It's quieter here, and lonely sometimes, but I think I needed to get lost a little to figure out who I am when no one's watching. Michael didn't say anything right away. He just leaned back in his chair, the warmth between them steady, quiet, and growing. And in the soft hum of the cafe, he realized she wasn't just writing a new chapter. She was letting him read it, one line at a time. The next morning, Michael stood at the edge of the garage, sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented travel mug, watching steam curl up into the bitter air. The sun hadn't yet broken through the clouds, and everything felt muted. Gray sky, gray pavement, the soft grind of metal on metal as one of the younger mechanics tried and failed to coax a rusted exhaust loose. All right, spill it, came a familiar voice behind him. Michael didn't even turn. Spill what? You've been walking around like someone rewired your brain, said Jesse, his best friend since high school and the only guy who could read Michael like a worn-out service manual. That look you've got? That's the I'm in deep and don't know what to do with myself face. Michael exhaled and leaned against the wall. It's complicated. It always is, Jesse said, hopping up on the edge of the workbench and folding his arms. Is this about the woman from the bake sale? Michael hesitated, then nodded. Her name's Anna. Emily invited her, and she actually showed up. Jesse raised an eyebrow. And I think she's the one who wrote the diary I found at the thrift store. There it was, spoken out loud for the first time. Jesse blinked. Wait, the diary? The one you keep reading like it's your personal gospel? Michael ran a hand through his hair. Yeah, I didn't know at first. But then we talked, and the things she said, they matched the entries, down to the way she looked at Emily. I know it's her. So have you told her? No. Why the hell not? Michael stared down at his boots, scuffed and stained with years of other people's oil leaks. Because it feels like I know her before I've earned the right to, like I've been handed the backstory without getting the trust. Jesse whistled low. Man, that's a line not many would hesitate to cross. Michael shrugged. She's still figuring out who she is. I don't want to show up in the middle of her rebuilding and act like I already have the blueprint. Jesse nodded slowly, a rare moment of silence stretching between them. Then he clapped Michael on the shoulder. You're either the most respectful guy I know or the dumbest. Time's going to figure out which. Michael gave a half smile. Yeah, I'm counting on that. That night, after Emily had drifted off to sleep with her stuffed bear tucked under one arm and the soft hum of her nightlight glowing in the corner, Michael sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was still, save for the occasional creak in the walls and the rhythmic ticking of the clock above the stove. The diary lay in front of him again, its leather cover worn smooth from nights like this. He told himself he wasn't going to read more tonight, that he'd give it a rest, let his thoughts breathe. But his fingers moved on their own, flipping through the familiar pages until he landed on one he didn't recognize. The ink was darker, the pen pressed harder into the paper, as if every word had been dragged out against the weight of something heavy. I don't think I fear being alone anymore. I fear being loved again, because love asks for trust, and trust is a cliff I'm not sure I can jump off of twice. The first fall nearly killed me. What if the second finishes the job? Michael swallowed hard. It wasn't just a passage. It was a confession, a raw, trembling thread of truth woven through every guarded smile Anna had given him since the day they met. She wasn't just careful, she was carrying a wound that hadn't fully closed. And maybe he was too. He traced the edge of the page with his thumb, heart thudding steadily against his ribs. He didn't know what it would mean to tell her the truth. Maybe she'd be angry. Maybe she'd feel exposed. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd feel seen. He couldn't keep holding this part of her in secret. Not if they were going to keep walking this quiet, tentative path towards something that looked a lot like hope. Michael closed the diary and exhaled deeply. Tomorrow, he would tell her. Not because he wanted answers, but because she deserved to know he'd read her heart, and still chose to be there, not despite the cracks, but because of them. The next day the air was crisp, edged with the sharpness that comes just before spring dares to break through winter's grip. Michael stood outside the Bean and Birch Cafe, the diary tucked beneath his arm, heart hammering like a loose piston. He'd rehearsed it a dozen times on the drive over, how he'd ease into it, how he'd explain. But now, staring through the cafe's fogged window at Anna, seated in her usual corner, he felt the weight of every word he hadn't yet spoken. She looked peaceful, mug in hand, notebook open, brow slightly furrowed as she jotted something down. When she glanced up and caught sight of him, her expression shifted into a warm smile that almost stopped him in his tracks. Almost. He stepped inside, the bell overhead announcing him. She waved him over, closing her notebook without hesitation. "Hey, stranger," she said. "I was hoping I'd see you." Michael sat down across from her, the diary still tucked close, his hands clenched too tightly around the edges. "Anna," he started, voice low, "there's something I need to tell you." She blinked, her smile dimming just a little. "Okay." He took a breath, then slid the diary onto the table between them, gently turning it so the gold star faced her. "I found this about a month ago, at the thrift store, buried in a box of books. I didn't know what it was at first, just that it felt real. I read it. All of it." Her eyes dropped to the cover, her face paled. For a moment she didn't speak, didn't move, and then slowly she pushed back from the table. "You read it?" she said, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know it was yours," he said quickly. "Not at first. I didn't even know your name. But after we met, after Emily, after everything, it just started to feel like more than coincidence." Anna's eyes shimmered, not with anger, but with something harder to watch, hurt. "That was private," she said, each word heavy. "I didn't mean for anyone to see that. I threw it away, for a reason." "I know," Michael said. "And I'm sorry, but it helped me understand. Not just you, myself too." She stood, grabbing her coat, voice trembling now. "You shouldn't know those things about me, Michael, not without me choosing to tell you. I didn't mean to take anything from you." "You didn't take it," she said, clutching the strap of her bag. "But you saw too much, and I don't know if I'm ready for that." With that she turned and walked out, leaving the diary and a silence between them that felt louder than anything he'd ever heard. It was 3 days before he saw her again. 3 days of sleepless nights, of rewinding the conversation in his head, searching for the exact moment he should have stopped, should have chosen differently. The diary sat unopened on his kitchen counter, like a wound he didn't know how to close. Every time he passed it, guilt pressed heavier into his chest. He hadn't meant to hurt her, but he had. On the 4th day, he found her. Not at the cafe, not walking the quiet streets of town, but at the park, sitting alone on a bench near the frozen pond, bundled in her coat, arms folded tightly across her chest. The wind blew strands of hair into her face, but she didn't move to tuck them back. Michael approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. She turned before he said a word, as if she'd felt him coming. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes held that same quiet steel from the cafe. Not rage, not even disappointment, just something rawer, a sadness that had no interest in pretending to be anything else. "Anna," he said softly. She didn't respond right away, just looked at him, then back at the pond. "I trusted you," she finally said. "Or I was starting to. And now I don't know where any of that went." Michael stepped closer, hands deep in his coat pockets. "I didn't know it was yours when I first read it." "That part I believe," she said. "But you kept reading, even after you suspected. And then you looked at me like you knew me. But you never gave me the chance to show you who I am." He nodded, throat tight. "I should have told you sooner. I was afraid. Afraid I'd break something that felt good before it had a chance to grow." Anna laughed bitterly. "And instead, you broke it anyway." "I didn't read it to invade your life," he said. "I read it because it was honest and beautiful, and because every page made me feel less alone. I didn't plan on falling for the person behind the words, but I did." Her eyes widened slightly, but her face stayed guarded. Michael took a breath. "You don't owe me forgiveness. But I didn't fall for your words, Anna. I fell for you. The way you speak to Emily. The way you smile when you don't think anyone's watching. The way you keep showing up even when you're scared." She looked at him then, really looked. And for a moment he saw it, the flicker of warmth beneath the pain, but she didn't move, didn't speak. Instead she stood slowly, brushing snow from her coat. "I need time," she said quietly, "and space, to decide if I can trust someone who saw me before I was ready to be seen." Then she walked away, leaving Michael standing in the cold, his breath fogging in the silence. And though the ache in his chest was real, it was also clear. Some things had to break before they could be rebuilt. The silence grew roots. At first, Michael thought he could ride it out, give Anna the space she'd asked for, focus on work, on Emily, on the day-to-day routine that never stopped demanding his attention. But it wasn't just the absence of her voice or her presence at the cafe, it was the weight of not knowing if silence was the pause between breaths or the end of the sentence. Weeks passed. Snow gave way to slush. The days grew longer by minutes, but the nights still felt endless. Emily didn't mention Anna much, only once or twice, in the soft, wondering way children do when they feel a shift in the air they can't quite name. "Is Anna still writing stories?" she asked one night at bedtime. "I don't know," Michael had replied gently, brushing her hair away from her forehead. "I hope so." He missed the quiet understanding that had bloomed between them in such a short time. The way she listened like she actually heard him, the way she had started to lean in just a little, even when it scared her. That bench in the park had been the last time he saw her, and the image of her walking away stayed with him more than he liked to admit. Work filled the hours. He stayed late at the garage, took extra shifts when another mechanic called in, and poured his hands into engines that didn't require emotional honesty. Machines were simpler than people. They broke, you found the crack, and you fixed it. But at home, when the tools were down and Emily was asleep, the quiet wasn't so easy to tune out. He'd catch himself staring at the diary, still untouched, still resting in the same place she'd left it. He couldn't bring himself to open it again, not now. Not when it felt like a part of her had been frozen between those pages. He didn't know if she would come back, didn't know if trust could survive the kind of rupture they'd both felt. But he knew one thing for sure. The space she left behind wasn't empty. It was waiting. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the past walked through the garage door. Michael was elbow-deep in the engine of a '99 pickup, sleeves rolled high, grease staining the cracks of his hands. Outside, early spring wind swept grit across the pavement, but inside, the steady rhythm of work kept time. He liked it that way. Predictable, mechanical, fixable. Unlike the weight that still lingered in his chest. He didn't hear the door open over the hum of the compressor, but he sensed her before he saw her. That subtle shift in the air, the silence that filled a room when something unspoken walked in, wearing a familiar face. When he turned, she was standing near the counter, Anna. Her hair was down this time, tucked behind one ear, and she looked out of place against the oil-streaked concrete and fluorescent lights. In her hands, she held something small and pink, Emily's backpack. Michael wiped his hands on a rag and stepped toward her, heart knocking against his ribs like it still hadn't learned how to be still around her. "She left it at the park," Anna said, her voice quiet, almost uncertain. "I found it under the bench yesterday. Thought I should bring it back." Michael took the bag slowly, nodding. "Thanks. She was looking for it last night." He glanced at her. "She'll be happy it's safe." Anna hesitated, her eyes scanning the garage like she wasn't sure she belonged here. "I wasn't planning to stay. I wanted to give it back in person." There was a pause between them, long but not empty. "I've been thinking about what you said," she continued, "about how you read it, about how you felt." Michael studied her face, the way her fingers clenched around the strap of her purse like she needed to hold on to something. "I was scared," she said. "Still am. But I'm also tired of running from people who actually care." Michael stepped closer slowly. "You didn't have to come." "I know," Anna said, meeting his eyes, "but I wanted to." And in that moment, beneath the smell of motor oil and the buzz of work yet to be done, something quiet passed between them, not a resolution, not yet, but the soft, tentative shape of something beginning again. The garage quieted as the afternoon lull settled in, the kind of stillness that made every sound feel louder, the ticking of a cooling engine, the soft scrape of a chair as Michael pulled it out for Anna in the office, the gentle rustle of her coat as she sat down across from him. Outside, the wind picked up, but inside, the moment felt oddly suspended, like time had hit the brakes just long enough for truth to catch up. Anna looked at him, really looked at him. Her eyes less guarded now, softer, but still edged with the weight of everything unspoken. "I don't usually do this," she said. "Do what?" Michael asked, his voice just above a whisper. "Come back, talk, let someone in." He nodded, not to rush her, just to let her know he understood. She drew in a breath, then let it out slowly. "I left my old life because it wasn't mine anymore. The job, the apartment, the relationship, it was all built around someone I was pretending to be. I thought if I walked away, I could finally hear myself think again." Michael leaned forward slightly. "And did you?" "Some days," she said. "Other days, the silence was worse than the noise I left behind." He knew that silence, knew the way it could echo in a house full of memories and unanswered questions. "After my wife died," he said carefully, "there were days when I'd walk into the kitchen and forget why I was there. I'd just stand still, waiting for something I couldn't name." Anna's eyes shimmered, and she didn't look away. "I think grief makes us invisible to the world," she said, "and sometimes to ourselves." Michael nodded. "And starting over feels like walking through fog. No map, just a hope that maybe something good's waiting on the other side." They were quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that didn't demand to be filled. Finally, Anna spoke, her voice steadier now. "You reading the diary? It hurt. But not because you invaded something, because you saw the part of me I'd tried to bury, and you stayed." Michael's throat tightened. "I didn't mean to know you like that before I really knew you." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's how we were meant to meet, through the parts we thought we had to hide." And in that soft, sacred pause, something shifted. Two people, once broken and afraid, finally speaking the same language. Truth, it turned out, didn't always need permission. It just needed space. They sat in the back office of the garage long after the afternoon sun dipped behind the trees, the light fading into a pale hush through the window. Michael had turned off the overhead fluorescence, letting the warm amber of the desk lamp fill the space. It softened the room, made it feel less like a workshop and more like a quiet place to speak hard truths. Anna held the diary in her hands now. She hadn't touched it since she'd left it behind at the thrift store, but her fingers moved over the leather like muscle memory, careful, reverent. "I never meant to keep it," she said, eyes fixed on the cover. "It started as something small, just a place to write down thoughts I didn't want to say out loud." Michael stayed quiet, letting her lead. I was in a relationship for 4 years. He was charming, ambitious, said all the right things, until I became something he had to control. Her voice didn't crack, but it was brittle around the edges. He made me believe I needed him to be whole, that without him, I was nothing. Michael's jaw tensed, but he didn't interrupt. I worked in a high-stakes corporate job. All was on, always proving I deserved to be in the room. I burned myself out trying to keep up, trying to make my life look polished on the outside, while everything inside me was splintering. She paused. Her hands tightened around the diary. "And then I got pregnant," she said, softer now, "and I lost it." Michael exhaled slowly, pain threading behind his ribs at the weight of her words. He didn't come home the night it happened. He was at a networking event. When I told him what I'd gone through, he said, "Maybe it's for the best," like it was an inconvenience more than a loss. Michael's fists curled in his lap. He swallowed the anger, knowing this wasn't about him. "I left 2 weeks later," Anna said, "packed what I could, dropped everything else, including this." She ran a hand over the diary again. "I didn't want to carry it anymore. It felt like the last piece of that life." Michael leaned forward, voice steady. But it was never just a record of pain. It was a record of surviving it. Anna looked up at him then, eyes shining but clear. "I didn't think anyone would ever read it. And I certainly didn't expect the person who did to be kind." Michael's voice was quiet, full of something deep and certain. "You deserve kindness, Anna. Every word of it." And in the glow of that small garage office, the diary between them no longer felt like a secret, but a beginning. The air inside the office felt heavier now, not oppressive, but thick with the quiet gravity of shared vulnerability. Anna sat curled slightly in her chair, the diary resting closed in her lap, her story laid bare like a house after a storm, broken in places, but still standing. Michael hadn't planned to speak, not tonight, not yet. But her honesty had opened something in him, something he'd kept locked away for so long it had started to feel like a permanent fixture in his chest. He stared down at his hands, still stained faintly with grease, and exhaled slowly. "It's been 3 years," he said, his voice rough with memory, "since Lily." Anna looked up, attentive but quiet, not pushing. "She had this laugh," Michael continued, smiling faintly, "big, unfiltered, the kind that made people turn around in restaurants. It used to embarrass me a little at first, but later I missed it more than anything." He paused, fingers drumming lightly on the arm of the chair. "It was a car accident. I got a call in the middle of the night. I still remember the ringtone. I haven't used it since." Anna didn't say a word, just listened, her expression soft with empathy. "She was gone before I got to the hospital, and suddenly I wasn't just a husband without a wife. I was a father who had to explain to a 4-year-old why Mommy wasn't coming home." His voice wavered, but he didn't stop. "Those first 6 months, I don't know how we got through them. Emily cried herself to sleep. I kept working because I didn't know what else to do. I fixed cars all day and stared at the ceiling all night." He looked up, met Anna's eyes. "I was scared to let myself feel too much, scared I'd fall apart and wouldn't be able to put myself back together. But then, one night, Emily climbed into my bed and said, 'It's okay, Daddy.' I remember her for both of us, and I knew I had to stop surviving and start living again, for her, for me." Anna reached across the table, her hand brushing lightly against his. "That's not surviving," she said softly. "That's strength." Michael shook his head. "Some days it just feels like getting by." "But you're still here," Anna said, "and you're not alone anymore." The truth lingered between them like warmth in winter, unexpected, long overdue, and exactly what they both needed. The sun had slipped beneath the horizon by the time they stepped outside, the garage now cloaked in the quiet stillness of early evening. The sky above was streaked in lavender and fading gold, and the wind had calmed, as if even nature had decided to let them breathe. They walked side by side toward the parking lot, their footsteps echoing faintly on the pavement. No rush, no tension, just a silence that no longer felt uncertain. Michael glanced at Anna, her hands tucked into her coat pockets, her eyes on the horizon. "I don't want to push you," he said, voice low and steady. "Not into anything you're not ready for." She looked over, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "I don't know that I'll ever feel ready, but I think I don't want to disappear either." He stopped walking, turned to face her fully. "I'm not looking for perfect. I don't need someone to fix everything. I just—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I want something real, something honest, even if it's messy." Anna's eyes didn't waver. "Honest, I can do. Messy? Well, I've had plenty of practice." They both laughed softly, tired laughter, not from amusement but relief. Like two people who'd been holding their breath for a very long time. "I can't promise I won't get scared," she added, "or that I won't pull back now and then." Michael nodded. "And I can't promise I'll always know the right thing to say, but I'll show up. I'll keep showing up." A long pause passed between them. Then, slowly, Anna reached out and took his hand. Not tightly, not like a vow, just a beginning. "Let's take it slow," she said. "No labels, no rushing, just step by step." Michael gave her hand the gentlest squeeze. Step by step. And in that simple exchange, no grand declarations, no promises of forever, something steady bloomed between them. Not a fairy tale, not a fix, just two people scarred but standing, willing to try, not for a perfect ending, but for a better beginning. They decided on something simple, dinner at a small diner just off Main Street, the kind of place with cracked leather booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked properly since the late 90s. It wasn't fancy, but that was the point. No pressure, no need to dress up or pretend. Just two people trying to be present, to see each other without the haze of the past clouding every moment. Michael arrived first, nervously checking the time even though he was early. He wore a button-up that Emily insisted on ironing, the collar slightly askew but cleaner than anything he usually wore. When Anna walked in, her hair loose around her shoulders and a soft, nervous smile playing on her lips, he stood without thinking. "You look real," he said, then winced. "I mean great, but also real. Sorry, that came out weird." Anna laughed, a quiet, genuine sound that lit her face in a way he hadn't seen before. "No, it didn't. I know exactly what you meant." They slid into the booth across from each other, menus barely touched, as conversation flowed more easily than either expected. They talked about growing up in small towns, about their favorite books as kids, about the terrible jobs they'd taken just to pay the bills. Michael told her about Emily's obsession with foxes and her current plan to become either a veterinarian or an astronaut, depending on which uniform she likes more. Anna smiled into her coffee. "She's a good kid. You can see it in the way she looks at you." Michael glanced down, a quiet warmth blooming in his chest. "She keeps me grounded, makes sure I don't stay stuck." "And what about you?" Anna asked gently. "Who keeps you going?" He looked up at her, really looked. "Lately? You?" The words sat between them, not heavy, but sincere. Anna didn't flinch. She just nodded. "No pressure," she said, reaching for her glass of water. "But I think we're both overdue for something that doesn't ask us to pretend." Michael smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "Then, here's to honesty, bad coffee, and whatever comes next." And under the hum of flickering lights and the faint sound of old music playing through the diner speakers, they laughed, soft and unguarded, not because everything was fixed, but because maybe for the first time it didn't have to be. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind that unfolded slowly, warm sun slipping through the curtains, cartoons humming in the background, and the faint scent of grilled cheese drifting from the kitchen. Michael stood at the stove, flipping sandwiches while Emily sat cross-legged at the table, coloring intently. They had just come back from a walk in the park with Anna. Nothing monumental had happened, no big conversations. Just the three of them, laughing about the geese chasing crumbs and watching Emily climb every structure in sight like it was a personal mission. But there had been a kind of rhythm to it, natural, easy, like they fit. Michael plated the sandwiches, setting one in front of Emily and taking the seat across from her. She took a bite, kicked her feet a little beneath the table, then looked up with that wide, thoughtful expression she only wore when her brain was working on something serious. "Dad," she asked between bites, "is Anna going to be my new mom?" Michael froze, the crust of his sandwich halfway to his mouth. The question came out of nowhere, innocent, unfiltered, and completely devastating. He lowered the sandwich slowly, tried to find words that didn't trip over the sudden knot in his throat. "Where'd that come from, sweetheart?" Emily shrugged. "She's around a lot, and she's nice. She listens, like Mom used to." Michael stared at his daughter, her face smeared slightly with cheese, her eyes clear and open in a way that only a child's could be. She wasn't asking with expectation, just curiosity, as if she were drawing a picture and wasn't sure yet what it was supposed to be. He cleared his throat. "Anna's special, yeah, but we're still getting to know each other. These things take time." Emily chewed slowly, then nodded. "Okay." She took another bite, thoughtful. "I'd be okay with it, I think, if she wanted to." Michael blinked hard, blinking away the sudden sting in his eyes. "Thanks, kiddo." She looked up and grinned. "Can I have juice?" He laughed, a little broken, a little whole. "Yeah, you can have juice." And as he stood to grab it from the fridge, the weight of her question lingered, not as pressure, but as a reminder. That love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it whispers through the mouths of children, asking the biggest questions in the simplest ways. Anna sat on the park bench, arms folded across her chest, her eyes tracking a kite dancing unevenly in the wind. Michael sat beside her, watching Emily run ahead toward the swings, her laughter carried by the breeze. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting everything in gold, softening the edges of the world. They'd been quiet for a while, not in discomfort, but in thought. It had been a good day, simple, light. But something in Anna's posture had shifted since the moment they arrived. Michael didn't push. He'd learned by now that when Anna pulled inward, it wasn't retreat. It was reflection. Eventually she spoke. "She asked me today," Anna said softly. Michael turned toward her. "Emily?" She nodded. "When you were grabbing water, she looked at me and said, 'Are you going to be my new mom?'" Michael's breath caught. "She asked me that a few days ago, too. I didn't know she'd brought it up with you." Anna stared ahead, not blinking. I didn't know what to say. I told her I liked spending time with her, that I care about her, that sometimes love takes a different shape than people expect. Michael said nothing, just let the words settle. She turned to him now, her expression caught somewhere between guilt and longing. "I'm not ready for that title. Mom. It's too big, too sacred. And I'm still learning how to be myself again, Michael. I don't want to promise more than I can give." He nodded, slowly. "I understand, and so would she if you said it in your own way. She's stronger than she looks." Anna exhaled, shoulders relaxing slightly. "I want to be here, with you, with her, but not as someone I'm not. Not yet." Michael reached over and gently took her hand, his thumb brushing against hers. "I don't need a title either, just truth. And you, exactly as you are." A pause. Anna smiled then, fragile but sincere. "Then I'll keep showing up for both of you." It wasn't a commitment stamped in ink. It wasn't a vow, but it was something honest, something that mattered more. Presence, not perfection. Spring had barely settled in when the first letter arrived, bold red ink, stamped across the envelope. Final notice. Michael read it twice before setting it face down on the workbench, his jaw tight, the pit in his stomach already spreading. The garage had been scraping by for months. Rising supply costs, fewer customers with newer cars that needed less work, and now the lease was up for renewal. with a massive rent hike he couldn't afford. He ran the numbers again and again, staying late in the office until the light burned out, and the silence pressed too hard against his chest. No matter how he sliced it, the numbers didn't lie. If something didn't change, Turner Auto Repair would be gone in 60 days. He didn't tell Anna, not at first. He couldn't bring himself to. They were just beginning to figure things out, just finding solid ground. He didn't want her to see him struggling, not like this, not when he was supposed to be the one holding it all together. But Anna noticed the shift. Of course she did. "You've been quieter," she said one evening, as they sat outside on his porch, Emily asleep inside, the stars blinking above them. Michael offered a tired smile. "Just work stuff. It'll sort itself out." She didn't press, but her gaze lingered, thoughtful. She didn't need to ask to know something wasn't right. A week later, as Michael reviewed another stack of overdue invoices, the landlord called. "The rent issue," the man said, "has been taken care of." Michael blinked. "What do you mean?" "A payment was submitted this morning, in full. Lease extended another year." "But I didn't—" He stopped. "Who paid it?" There was a pause. The invoice came with a business wire transfer and a note, said it was from a silent investor who believes in second chances. Michael stood in stunned silence as the line went dead. Later that night he found Anna in the cafe, sipping tea, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup like she was thinking about something too big to say. He sat across from her, watched her for a long moment. "You were a CFO once, right?" he asked, voice low. Anna's eyes met his, a soft smile already forming. "Still am," she said. "Just quieter about it." Michael didn't know what to say. The gratitude in his chest was too big for words, but Anna reached across the table, placed her hand over his, and said simply, "You don't have to do everything alone." By mid-April, the thaw had settled in for good. Patches of green crept back into the lawns. The hardware store brought out its garden tools, and the town square slowly filled with life again. Kids on scooters, coffee cups balanced on stroller handles, neighbors catching up without shivering. And people noticed. It started with little things. Anna and Michael sitting on the cafe patio with Emily, all three of them sharing a slice of pie, laughing at a story Emily insisted on telling, one she kept forgetting the end to. Then it was the weekend farmers market, where Anna helped Emily pick out sunflowers while Michael stood just a step behind, his hand brushing lightly against Anna's back in that unconscious, familiar way people have when they no longer feel like strangers. Maplewood was a small town. Whispers didn't need an invitation. "She's the one who helped save the garage, right?" "I heard she used to be some big shot in the city." "They're not official, but you can tell. It's different." He smiles more. No one said anything unkind. If anything, there was a quiet, collective warmth around the shift. Michael had always been the man who helped without being asked, the one who fixed things he didn't charge for, who showed up when people didn't expect anyone to. And now they were watching something return to him, slowly, tenderly, deservedly. Even old man Jensen, who came in every Thursday for a tire pressure check he could have done himself, gave Michael a knowing nod. "She's good for you," he muttered. "Don't mess it up." Emily noticed, too. She started holding Anna's hand without being asked, started asking if she could sit next to her in restaurants, started humming when the three of them were together like she was inventing a soundtrack no one else could hear. At the end of one of those days, Michael stood with Anna outside his house as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting the town in gold. "I think people are starting to talk," he said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Anna raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "No," he said, stepping closer, "but I might be falling into a cliché." "And what's that?" He smiled. Small-town mechanic falls for the woman who walked into his life at exactly the right time. Anna didn't laugh. She just leaned in and with her forehead against his whispered, "Then maybe clichés are worth keeping." The day had been slow and golden, the kind of spring afternoon that made everything feel a little lighter. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch after a long morning at the park, still clutching a juice box and a crayon-streaked page of wildflowers. Michael and Anna sat on the porch steps, listening to the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional bark from a neighbor's dog. They hadn't said much. They didn't need to. The quiet between them had become familiar, not empty, but full of everything they no longer had to explain. Michael leaned back on his palms, gazing out at the yard where Emily had left her chalk drawings scattered like little constellations across the driveway. Then he reached into the pocket of his flannel and pulled something out. A small cloth-bound journal. Simple. Blank. The cover was a soft shade of sage green, and a thin leather tie held it closed. He handed it to Anna, who took it slowly, brows drawing together in quiet curiosity. "What's this?" she asked, running her thumb over the edge. Michael smiled, eyes steady. "It's a new journal, for the next chapter." Anna looked up at him, something flickering in her eyes, surprise, warmth, maybe even a little fear. "I figured," he continued, "the last one told the story of everything you had to leave behind. Maybe this one can be about what you're finding now, what we're finding." Her fingers tightened slightly around the book. "I don't expect you to fill it," he added, "but I wanted you to have it, in case you want to start again, not alone this time." Anna was quiet for a long moment, the breeze tugging gently at her hair. Then she opened the journal and flipped through the first few empty pages, the sound crisp and clean in the quiet. "No locks, no hidden corners," she said softly. "No secrets," Michael agreed. She closed it again, smiled faintly, and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then let's write carefully," she whispered. "But let's write it together." And there, beneath the soft hush of the spring sky and the fading light, the first page remained untouched, waiting, but no longer afraid. It was a quiet morning, the kind that carried the stillness of closure. Rain tapped gently at the windows, a soft, rhythmic sound that felt more like comfort than gloom. Anna sat at her kitchen table, the old diary open in front of her, its leather cover worn, its spine gently cracked from too many nights spent in her hands. The pages had stopped whispering months ago, but she hadn't known how to say goodbye, until now. She flipped to the final page, still blank, still waiting. "To the woman I used to be," she began, her handwriting slow, careful. "You were scared. You were tired. You thought the only way to survive was to disappear, but you didn't vanish. You shed what no longer fit and stepped into the unknown anyway. That alone was brave." She paused, the pen trembling slightly in her fingers. "You thought love had to be earned with perfection, that healing meant never hurting again. But now you know, it's not about erasing pain. It's about letting it sit beside you without taking over the whole room. You left this diary behind because you believed your story had ended, but all you really needed was a blank page." She signed it AJ, then closed the book gently, her fingers lingering on the gold-embossed star in the corner. Later that afternoon, Anna stepped into the same thrift store where Michael had first found the diary. The bell above the door gave its familiar jingle, and the scent of worn denim and old wood filled the air. She smiled at the woman behind the counter, placed the diary carefully into the donation bin near the register, and walked out without another word. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was breaking open into pale blue, and everything smelled new. Back home, her new journal sat on the nightstand, its pages still mostly untouched, but no longer waiting in fear. Just ready. She didn't need the old words anymore, but maybe someone else did. The morning sunlight spilled through the windows like a soft promise, warm and golden, casting long, lazy stripes across the hardwood floor. Birds called from the trees outside, and the breeze carried the scent of blooming lilacs through the open front door. It was the kind of spring day that didn't ask for anything but to be lived in, fully, honestly, with both feet on the ground. Michael stood in the doorway, coffee in hand, watching Emily hop from one square of the walkway to the next, a chalk rainbow trailing behind her like a signature. She wore her fox hoodie again, the sleeves too short now, but she refused to let it go. Some things, she told him, were worth keeping, even if they didn't fit quite right anymore. Anna stepped out beside him, barefoot on the porch, her hair tucked behind her ears, the green journal he'd given her resting on the table beside a small vase of hand-picked daisies. Her hand found his without looking, their fingers threading together like it had always been meant to happen that way. Not suddenly, not perfectly, just naturally, like sunlight finding the corner of a dark room. "Think she'll ever run out of energy?" Anna asked, smiling at Emily's dramatic leap across a pretend lava pit. Michael laughed. "Not a chance." Emily looked back at them, hands on her hips. "Are you two coming, or what? I need both of you to make it across the bridge." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Bridge?" She pointed to a chalk drawing, a wobbly blue line that ran across the path. "That's the river. You have to hold hands and step together. That's the rule." Anna glanced at him, amused. "Well, we can't break the rules." They stepped down together, Anna's hand in his, Emily grabbing hold of them both as they reached the line. "1, 2, 3, she shouted. They jumped. Just a small hop, but one that felt like something more. Something weightless. On the other side, Emily giggled and twirled, victorious. Anna leaned into Michael's shoulder, and for a moment the world slowed down around them. They weren't a perfect family. They didn't need to be. They were a real one. And this quiet, messy, beautiful morning was the beginning of everything.